And who's that sullen man? I gave him half a chance and teenage me became a fan. Can hear it in his voice that he's an emo from Japan, but there was more in store still. And since then I've had thoughts in the night, how there's more to talk about than dark and light. With more discussions the fans could unite, but then I'll see folks tomorrow saying he's a scumbag, don't you know? So this video wasn't meant to turn out like this. Initially, I was gonna go the route of how the Kazuya B-sides went. Brief, unscripted thoughts about how he looked in Tekken 8, what I thought about the character, and what angles I wanted to see explored further in the story. But after sitting with this for a while, and seeing lots of takes about Jin from various sides of the fan base, I felt I would no longer be satisfied with briefly spouting my unorganized thoughts. So instead, you're getting this thing. Essentially, this is the closest... Essentially, this is the closest I'm getting to a video essay. It's not entirely a video essay, more a dipping my toes into the waters of video essays. I'll be discussing Jin Kazama, analyzing his character in depth while sharing my headcanons and inviting you all to think a little differently with me. Spoilers, content warnings. Let's get those out of the way, shall we? I can't claim to know if Jin Kazama was a controversial character prior to Tekken 8's story mode. I'm not talking about controversial gameplay. I know he was pretty OP and frustrating in Tekken 4, for example, but that's not the focus of the video. In my memory, the most controversy around Jin as a character was centered around the direction his character went in Tekken 6. There have been two schools of thought regarding Jin in the fanbase. First one, I dub the Xiaoyu side, is the side that essentially thinks Jin is not beyond redemption, though it also often accompanies claims that he isn't to blame for his actions in Tekken 6, or that he's a good, kind, thoughtful person underneath all the war crimes and being a bit of a shithead. A fair amount of people on this side also like to believe that Jin will find redemption through murdering his father and then being healed by the power of love. That love either comes from the character they like to ship him with, or his mother, the pure angel whose very touch heals all. The second one I dub the Miguel side, the side that, in blatant contrast, thinks Jin is beyond redemption, that him starting World War III and ruining countless lives cannot be waved away by arguments of, well, he's just sad or misunderstood, or it was the devil controlling him, really. They believe such excuses are contrived, and if he is to be redeemed, he'll have to do a lot more than just beat Kazuya, say sorry for his crimes, and then live happily ever after. This side also tends to believe he can only seek redemption through death, a generalized observation of mine, to be clear. Not everyone can be cleanly divided into the Xiaoyus and the Miguels. Both the Xiaoyus and the Miguels have some valid points. Not saying either side is completely wrong in how they feel. Media is media. Everyone responds to it differently, and everyone arrives at their own conclusions. What I am saying, though, is that I spent a lot of my years being a fan-based wallflower who just digested everyone else's viewpoints, and now I feel I should offer one of my own. One that I haven't seen voiced by anyone yet. Lord knows, the reason I started things like Ayano B-sides, and now this, whatever this is, was to have some sort of creative outlet for my opinions without being limited by a character limit. So, let's start from the beginning. Now, unlike many others who have been with the characters since the beginning, from Tekken 3, I was introduced to the character in Tekken 5. I'm late to the party, but it is what it is. To me, he was an emo boy. A good boy, mostly emo. Very similar to a lot of characters I'd come to know and love in my childhood, and in some cases, eventually hate as well. Don't ask. Despite having only known him for one game, his Tekken 5 story ending still took me by surprise. To be fair, I was a kid. It was one of the first times I experienced a protagonist turning evil in any media, but his goodness was still apparent enough to me that it was a genuinely shocking twist. Again, I was a kid, leave me alone. And then, because I grew up lower middle class in Pakistan, I'd never find out how the story continued until years later, because I couldn't afford a next-gen console. When I got to play Tekken 6, I was surprised that they were legit going in the Jin is evil direction. It was an engaging premise to me, if only because I wanted to see how it would end. Was he just evil now? Like Kazuya and Heihachi? Or was there some secret behind the cruelty that could potentially absolve him of his crimes? And when I finally got to the end of the story, it turned out the answer was... well, yes, but actually no.
我は実体化を果たすとアザゼルの思念は語っていた。その時こそが唯一のチャンスだ。
だからこの戦争を起こしたというのか。奴を実体化させるために。
そうだ。俺はアザゼルとの戦いの果てに互いに消滅することを望んだ。その時こそ俺はこの呪われたちの呪縛から解放され、結果世界は救われる。
And this is where I assume the divide was first formed. Jin's story, and a lot about Jin really, was then put on hiatus for years with the release of Tag 2, which didn't advance the story at all. And then Tekken 7, which focused more on the conflict and history between Heihachi and Kazuya. Jin was technically there in the story, but nothing about him was expanded on or explored. He was just unconscious and treated like a MacGuffin for Heihachi to obtain, before the writers completely dropped that and switched to the Mean Girls plot. I swear to God the Tekken 7 story review I kept talking about will come out one of these days. I think this hiatus encouraged pre-existing opinions on Jin to ferment, for lack of a better word. The story didn't provide anything new for us to chew on regarding his motivations and thoughts, but it did show us more of the state of the world in the aftermath of Jin's actions. The narrator wasn't popular in Tekken 7, but if he had one use, it was to show just how devastating the war Jin started was to the general populace. We saw inklings of this in Tekken 6, notably with the character story of new character Miguel, and some areas in Scenario Campaign, but the focus was generally on the family drama of the Mishimas, and with Lars and Elisa's little road trip of falling in love before getting your heart viciously ripped out and cast aside.
I hurt myself today.
Also, since this didn't really fit in anywhere else in the video anymore, here's Lars taking an electric shit. That one was for you, Inflict. Literally only for you. I hope you liked it, cause I may be harboring some regrets right about now, but I digress. Since Bandai Namco started dropping trailers for Tekken 8, one thing that they've highlighted is how the focus is going back to Jin this time. In the first chapter of the story, which is available free to play in the demo right now, Kazuya points out that Jin's actions resulted in the deaths of countless people, and Jin expresses his desire to atone for his sins. Evidently, they haven't abandoned that storyline. In fact, we may be seeing a resolution to it finally. Normally, I'd be excited since I care about Jin way more than I cared about Heihachi and Kazuya. Jin's story is the one I want to see a resolution to. And yet, I have so many reservations. They've been fumbling the ball with a lot of character stories for a while now, so I've lost any hope that they'll suddenly do something revolutionary with their story mode. It is what it is. We'll have to see where they go from there. I will gladly admit I was wrong, if they prove me wrong. Having said that though, I felt I wanted to introduce some new directions from which to consider Jin before the story drops. If this ends up being for naught, well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. There are 2 points, or headcanons you could say, that I want to discuss. Point number 1. Jin is depressed. Before you start, no. I'm not bringing up mental health as a way to exonerate Jin of his crimes, nor am I trying to assign a concrete, legitimate diagnosis to a fictional character that probably won't ever be confirmed by the creators. Just hear me out, please. Put the gun down. Even though I only got into Tekken from 5 onwards, I did visit the previous entries at later points in my life. If not to play it, then just to experience the stories of different characters. And it was enlightening to learn that Jin wasn't always a solemn, silent emo boy with huge family baggage. Okay, well, the baggage used to be smaller. Jin in Tekken 3 was interesting to me. He was raised in the middle of nowhere by a single-parent June until she got deleted from the lore by Shrek, and we see some of her influence in his personality. Like the fact that his hobby for the longest time was forest bathing. FYI, forest bathing doesn't mean literally taking baths in the forest, which is what I thought was the case for years. I just casually believed Jin would go off in the night with a shower cap and a rubber ducky to dip in a river or something. No, he just vibes among the trees like a hippie. That was a joke. Alongside being a nature lover, he also likes fighting, and can be seen as arrogant about his skills, depending which way you look at it. He wasn't described as quiet, sullen, or a loner in Tekken 3, as far as I could tell. Just that he loved his mom, wanted to avenge her death, and also saw the tournament as a chance to prove his strength. If anything, Eddie was the emo boy of Tekken 3, with his likes being power and his dislikes being weakness. How the mighty have fallen. Jin really only became the way he is now after Heihachi realized he was out of electrics, but not out of options. Which coincidentally was also what awoke the devil gene within him. To me, the devil gene isn't just a demonic power-up. It's also a metaphor for trauma. With both Kazuya and Jin, their devil gene awoke when they experienced trauma. Specifically, betrayal from a man who was their only remaining family at the time. And they both, notably, process this in different ways. Kazuya takes his devil gene, his trauma, and embraces it. He first uses it to take revenge against the one who hurt him, and then proceeds to use it to hurt other people by exerting his dominance over the entire world. Something, this isn't a Kazuya video. Jin, in contrast, fights against the devil gene, against his trauma, and tries to squash it down because he doesn't want to lose control and hurt other people. These are two very different responses to trauma. One takes it and uses it to hurt others. The other tries to erase it, but only after unsuccessfully trying to bury it. I'm not a psych major, full disclosure, but I feel like they're both going about it in an unhealthy way. Obviously, this isn't a perfect metaphor, and as far as I can tell from my minimal research, it's not allegory either. It's applicability. The reason I believe the Jin has depression is, in full disclosure, partially because of my own experiences. Jin's personality first changed after the events of Tekken 3.
Day after day, Jin trained in the traditional art of karate. Ever since his betrayal by Heihachi, Jin loathed anything related to the Mishimas, his lineage, his fighting style, the devil gene in his blood, everything.
He began to hate everything about himself, his family and the devil gene specifically. This was directly a result of Heihachi's betrayal, and according to other character stories, was also more or less confirmed that he began to distance himself from those he knew before. His sole purpose in life, the only thing keeping him going, was to destroy the parts of himself he hated, to destroy his bloodline, i.e. his father and his grandfather. When I was 17, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. It was a bit of a surprise at the time, to say the least, to someone who'd never understood depression as anything other than feeling sad. I didn't think it made sense for me to have depression when I had never experienced major trauma. My parents didn't pass away early, I didn't grow up in abject poverty, I didn't have to live without basic amenities, I didn't really experience any breakups because I didn't date. I had a relatively good life, all things considered. So subsequently, I was confused as to why I was having angry outbursts, followed by periods of feeling absolutely nothing but self-loathing and inadequacy. I would learn later that depression wasn't just feeling sad, it was feeling empty. It was feeling angry, frustrated, lonely, inadequate, and overwhelmed, all while having no way to communicate it. And I would also learn that it isn't limited to people who experience trauma. It turns out that the reason I got depressed was because I had been keeping my emotions inside of me for years. Whenever I felt upset, angry, frustrated, lonely, any sort of negative emotion, I got into a habit of shutting it all away instead of communicating it. And it took me unlearning those habits and thought patterns for me to finally overcome it. Not entirely. I still have days where I slip back into old habits, but I'm definitely better now than I was before. And it's with that experience that I begin to see Jin differently. In Tekken 4, he wants to be rid of the parts of him that he doesn't like. In Tekken 5, he's suffering from nightmares and outbursts because the repression isn't working anymore. And in Tekken 6, he's decided that the best solution is to just end himself. Jin starts a war and causes mayhem and tragedy across the world to awaken Azazel, who he believes is the source of the devil gene. He then plans to kill Azazel and die in the process. He hates himself because he hates his father and grandfather, and there's a part of them in him. He wants to die because he thinks him, Kazuya, and Heihachi are a net negative in the world. But at the end of the day, regardless of why, this is self-loathing and suicidal ideation. I can't believe I'm about to do this.
Damn it, you're not trying to do the right thing. You're running away. You're looking for a way out, a death that's no different than suicide.
Lightning returns, when will you leave me be? Killing Azazel in the hopes that the devil gene would go away with him was Jin's attempt to shortcut the solution. A solution where, instead of having to confront his family members and end them personally, the devil gene is just deleted from existence, and him along with it. In his mind, the devil gene is the greatest threat to humanity, and so anything done in an effort to get rid of that is simply the ends justifying the means. It's the excuse he uses as well when faced with the reality of war to justify his horrible actions so he doesn't spiral into further self-loathing and guilt. But when that excuse fails, his death-seeking nature rears its head again. We see evidence of this in Miguel's Tekken 7 ending.
¿No me reconoces? No, supongo que no.
When Miguel tells Jin how he's personally responsible for the death of his family, and Jin has to face the fact that his actions robbed another man like himself of an irreplaceable beloved family member, it's telling that the only response Jin has to that is this.
殺せ
Lo haré. Pero no ahora. Aún no ha sufrido lo suficiente como para merecer la muerte.
Emotional, damn it!
He doesn't want to accept that the devil gene, his trauma, is a part of him, for better or for worse. Instead, he wishes to be rid of it, for the problem to disappear so he doesn't have to live with it anymore. Whether that involves destroying his own family, isolating himself from those who cared about him, starting a war to birth a demon into existence just to destroy it, or surrendering his own life to someone else, all of that is preferable to accepting his trauma, his flaws, and his sins. It's no wonder to me that with all of that combined, Jin exhibits what I interpret and recognize as depression. In my opinion, it explains the change in personality from 3 to 4, and then from 5 to 6. He's getting worse because he continues his unhealthy patterns. But that's only half of the story. Point number 2. Jin is not himself. This point requires a lot more unpacking than the last one. This was something I felt for a while, but it didn't materialize into a tangible concept that I could explain until I watched Tekken Bloodline. For those who don't know, Tekken Bloodline is a Netflix animated series adapting / based around the events of Tekken 3. In my opinion, it's the best Tekken adaptation ever made to date, and still somehow manages to just be average. It has a lot of amazing storytelling and character moments, but it's mostly let down by the weird lighting decisions in the animation, the last episode just being half flashback, and some retcons that didn't sit well with me. It's great if you're a fan of Tekken, but wasn't anything phenomenal. But I bring up Bloodline because I loved how it handled Jin specifically, and how they portrayed his chief struggle across the show. And no, I don't mean his quest to avenge the death of his mother. Bloodline, interestingly enough, introduced an internal conflict stirring within Jin before Shrek showed up to kickstart the plot. The show associates the two different sides of Jin with his two bloodlines. Get it? Kazama style, a style that revolves around redirecting your opponent's strength and using it against them, is associated with pacifism and restraint. And thus, it is associated with Jun.
The first opponent you must defeat in any fight is yourself. You must conquer your thoughts. If you're distracted, how are you going to see the clear path to defeating someone else?
Mishima style, a style about raw power being concentrated into your strikes, is associated with anger and ruthlessness, and thus associated with Heihachi and Kazuya. Heihachi basically summarizes Jin's character journey and his primary internal struggle with this one line.
You must purge the Kazama pacifism and stoke your Mishima fire.
The show proceeds to shelf this for the next few episodes to focus more on the fights and other characters, while setting up Jin for the realization that his grandfather is kind of an asshole and he shouldn't trust him. The internal struggle is brought back into focus in the flashback-heavy final episode, after Jin is betrayed by his only family member, and the sequences running through Jin's head alternate between Jun and Heihachi, between Kazama style and Mishima style, before culminating into this. Jin finds himself in a new place, divorced from his current reality of pain and turmoil. It's a sight to behold, a beautiful blue sky dotted with fluffy white clouds, and reflected perfectly by the surface of the water he stands in, undisturbed and impossibly still. It's beautiful and quiet, and the horizon seems to stretch endlessly. But soon enough he realizes he's not alone. There, framed by a vibrant sunset, is his mother Jun. She smiles at him, as she often would, and Jin is reminded of her, of them, of their love for each other. In this perfect, empty beauty is just him and his beloved mother. And yet, even here, with everything he could possibly want in front of him, Jin can't offer a smile in return like he once could. In his hand, he holds a childhood picture, a reminder of what they once were, of what he once was. He extends the memory in his hand and calls out to his mother. The smile fades, a tear is shed, and he instead sends her his final message.
I'm sorry, Mother.
In my opinion, this is the best scene in the entire show. It's amazing visual storytelling, and it stuck with me for months after I'd seen it. I invite other people to think differently, but here's my interpretation of this. This place, a place so perfect, beautiful, and undisturbed, is the afterlife. Jin is dying after Heihachi fatally shot him in the head. In his final moments, he's faced with his mother as he last knew her, and here in the afterlife, in front of his mother, he's at a crossroads. But what are the paths he has to choose between? How did we get here? In our introduction to Jin and Bloodline, he's getting his ass kicked by some bullies. He just takes it instead of retaliating, until one of them mentions his mama in his shit talk, and they then learn, you do not make yo mama jokes with someone who's not a homie.
That's enough!
But they jumped me.
It doesn't matter. Know when to stop.
The scene introduces Jin and June effectively, in my opinion, and establishes their relationship and dynamic. June is the loving but stern mother who wants to impart her beliefs about pacifism to her son. Jin is a boy who doesn't seek conflict, but is also quick to anger and doesn't believe in turning the other cheek when he's wronged. In the show, June's main critiques of Jin were that he couldn't control his anger and that he didn't have compassion for those he was angry towards. She considers it a lost fight when Jin doesn't stop fighting his bullies after it was clear he won, and when one of their fathers comes to their house, drunk off his ass, badmouths June.
Maybe you had a man in that house? The boy know better.
Oh, hell no!
And tries to stab them with a broken bottle. She disapproves of Jin being happy when the drunk ass got put in his place.
No, Jin. We should never take pleasure in the suffering of others.
It's quite a believable mother-son dynamic, and yet... bleh. I'ma say it, June is being unreasonable. Okay, you're his mother. You want your son to be a good person, and you teach him good things. I'm not a mother, but I get wanting the best for your child. Having said that, Jin has an anger problem, according to her.
The most important thing I can teach you is to control your anger and use whatever power you have for good.
But so far, the only incidents in which he's lost his temper are in situations where someone is antagonizing him and or his mother. I feel it's reasonable for him to be angry when he is abused, and to be happy when people who are dicks are put in their place. He's not a pure pacifist. He hasn't got June's inner peace and patience because, of course he doesn't. He's still a child. Try as he might, and try as June might, he is not her. June in Bloodline sees a lot of potential in Jin.
You are a Kazama, and it's important to me that you use that gift for good.
June represents an ideal, something Jin looks up to and reveres. It's why, even though he seems to have arguments ready at the tip of his tongue, he lets them die in his throat and instead replies with a solemn,
Yes, ma'am.
He swallows his complaints and abides by what his mother says, because he just trusts she's right, much like many children do with their parents.
You lost a fight today, Jin.
No, I didn't.
You lost the fight with yourself, Jin. The battle against your anger. I know you're better than that.
I think I've seen this film before.
Okay, I said no more personal anecdotes. And from June and Kazama style, we shift to Heihachi and Mishima style. Heihachi, in blatant contrast to June, tells Jin to let his anger fuel him, and that mercy and hesitation are not for Mishima. The training he makes Jin undergo to face Ogre is, to be frank, straight up abusive. I swear if he didn't own the school Jin goes to, I'm sure one of the teachers would have called Child Protective Services. Seeing as Jin seems to always be injured and bruised on a daily basis, but Jin takes to the new philosophies well enough. He has a lot of anger, and Heihachi knows exactly what to say and what to do to stoke that fire in him.
When the pain is too much, or you're too weak to get back on your feet, think of your helplessness when Ogre killed your mother, and let the anger that comes with that memory lift you back up.
But eventually we see that he doesn't entirely vibe with his grandfather either.
Good. Now, finish him.
Finish him?
No. Come here!
Heihachi sees the virtues that Jin learned from his mother as weaknesses. things that will get in the way.
Hesitation is a weakness, and most likely what killed your mother.
He disapproves of Jin checking in on Leroy after he does a Mortal Kombat X-ray on him.
Had your mother defeated Ogre, would she have visited him later to ask how he was feeling to win King of Iron Fist? You must shed every ounce of weakness your mother has instilled in you. It is the only way to avenge her.
And it's immediately after this conversation, and during his fight with Hwarang, that Jin is shown to struggle between his mother's teachings and Heihachi's.
I did want to hurt them.
You lost the fight with yourself, Jin. No, you're better than that.
Jin does show Hwarang mercy when he wins in the end, greatly angering Heihachi in the process. Great face, by the way. But this wasn't a moment where he won some great internal battle of good versus evil. Instead, this confirmed a pattern Jin had. Versus those who wrong or antagonize him, the Mishima gloves are on. But versus those he cares for, the Kazama influence wins over. And honestly, that doesn't strike me as a huge character flaw quite yet. To me, that's reasonable. The great internal battle, though, happens instead in the final moments of the show. And thus, we end up back here, in the afterlife. Jin is in a position where he has to choose. Either let go of his anger and his trauma, and he'll be with his mother again in a world where nothing can hurt him. Or hold on to his trauma, feed into his anger, and be wrenched back into the real world by triggering the devil gene. Back into the painful, unjust world to take revenge against the one who hurt him, and never see his mother ever again. And when he makes this choice, the struggle is plain on his face. He wants so badly to choose the Kazama side, to make his mother proud, and to stand alongside her with no regrets. But when he says the words,
I'm sorry, Mother,
it's clear he ultimately couldn't let it go. In his final moments when he had to choose between someone he cared for and someone who wronged him, he let Mishima win.
You lost the fight with yourself, Jin. The battle against your anger.
Before anyone points it out, yes, Bloodline isn't exactly canon to the games. It has many characters in the show who definitely weren't in Tekken 3, and the outfits for a fair amount of the characters are wrong too. Though I give them a pass for using Julia's Tekken 7 outfit instead of her original because, you know. But in my opinion, Bloodline's depiction of Jin, Heihachi, and Jun at least, is relatively accurate to the canon, while adding some very welcome nuance. It's about the only sort of insight we get into what Jin's life with his mother was like before Shrek showed up. And it's also propped up positively by Harada and Murray, who definitely didn't do the same to the live-action Tekken movie, which was much more egregious in its divergence from the canon. So yeah, Bloodline may not be canon, but it's mostly canon accurate. And it helped me finally understand a key point about Jin that I couldn't articulate properly until now. The most basic theme at play with Jin is duality. A boy born to a demon, he who causes chaos and destruction, and a shrine maiden, she who walks in the light with the goal of cleansing the dark. And Jin has always been fighting between them. He's not evil, but he's not good. He walked in the light, but then embraced the darkness. He loads the Mishima in him, but also forsakes the Kazama. And that's where the strength of the character truly is, in my opinion. That's where Jin ends up being what all of us ultimately are when we combine our merits and our flaws. A human. But wait, he's also a war criminal. It's time to present my conclusion, and what I hope will be the main point people take from this. Jin's been a flawed protagonist for years now. I don't think he was ever the classic definition of a hero, even if his father fits the term anti-hero much better. He never really crossed a line until... Near the beginning, I talked about the Xiaoyus and the Miguels representing the sides of the discourse surrounding Jin, but where do I fall on that spectrum? Personally, I don't think Jin's actions in Tekken 6 can be easily redeemed. I also am not in the camp that thinks he wasn't in control of that. Personally, I think that claim is bullshit. I mentioned before how, in my eyes, the devil gene is a part of both Kazuya and Jin, so I don't believe for a second that the devil gene is to blame for their actions. Hell, in Tekken 7, they introduced the plot point that the devil gene is not inherently evil. The clan from which it originates, the Hachijo clan, use these powers to eliminate threats to the world at large. You could make an argument about whether that goal is inherently good, but it's not inherently evil either. Jin quotes Nietzsche, this dude, in Tekken 6, not because he's saying the devil made me do it, but because he's saying, I am the devil. Or at least, I'm turning into the devil. In his video essay titled Dissecting the Manosphere, FD Signifier breaks down the philosophy around the quote Jin recites, and I honestly feel that whole section of the video is very relevant to both Kazuya and Jin.
The core theme of nihilism is that nothing, not even human life, has any intrinsic meaning or value. An editorial published in the Harvard Crimson had the following to say about nihilism. You see, nihilists can be broken into two specific groups. The first are the passive nihilists. These are individuals who, when faced with the realization that existence has no inherent meaning, can fall into a deep depression as a result. However, there exists another group of nihilists. An active nihilist is someone who, when confronted with the exact same realization, rejoices at the freedom that it gives them. A lot of edgelords are operating in a passive nihilism. Instead of finding useful ways to take their newfound freedom of mind to pursue something that is important, they seek vengeance. They want to punish the world for ever tricking them into believing in it in the first place.
Kazuya, after a series of adverse childhood experiences and his own choices in adulthood, has become a nihilist. To him, nothing matters except power. Power is all that matters because to him, a lack of power is what robbed him of his positive human connections. Power is what enabled him to get revenge, and it continues to make him untouchable by anyone. He cannot lose anything else if he is in control of everything. But Jin isn't the same.
This desire for power to correct or to take revenge on a thing, to me, doesn't seem very nihilistic. It seems that you really care a lot, that this is something that does have value, that is important to you. But you see this concept of nihilism still being championed among edgelords.
In Tekken 6, he tries to make this bullshit argument about how the world is rotten even without him starting World War III. But if he truly believed nothing mattered, he wouldn't have gone through all of this to destroy his own bloodline. He could have just been like, fuck the world, I'm ballin'. But he didn't. But he's weighing himself down with his baggage and still thinks the devil gene is the greatest threat to the world and must be eradicated. Consequences be damned. He cares enough to want the world to be better, but his personal trauma and family drama override everything. Duality is a core part of Jin's identity, but it also represents the mental barrier he has to overcome. To Jin, everyone is either good or evil. The world is black and white, and he doesn't entertain the idea of any color otherwise or in between. Seeing everything in extremes, also known as splitting in the brain doctor world, is associated with various mental health disorders, including depression, and I can confirm, personally, that it plays a huge part in perpetuating the cycle of self-hatred. Jin needs to overcome his binary way of thinking. He needs to learn and accept that the world can't be neatly divided into good and evil. But he holds on to this idea and is constantly at war with it, which prevents him from fully realizing his own identity and his own potential. When I said in the previous section, Jin is not himself, that was not me saying he wasn't himself because he's doing bad things. That was me saying Jin literally does not allow himself to be himself. Oh my god, this already sounds so annoying to explain. He's not Kazuya. He's not Jun. He's not Heihachi. He's not Kazumi. He's Jin. And what that means is something he needs to explore and realize on his own. As long as he spends his life fighting against himself and making up for the sins of his family, or making up for his own sins, he won't ever feel like he's fully atoned, because he'll always have the devil's blood in him. To be able to move on and atone, he also needs to accept who he is. For as long as he keeps thinking his devil blood is something to purge from the world, he can never be of sound mind or heart. Jin can't make up for what he did just by defeating Kazuya, and or dying in the process. He can't be redeemed through the power of love either, because at the risk of sounding so cheesy,
if you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you gonna love somebody else?
I want Jin to accept himself, accept that he's human, and humans aren't ever black or white. I want him to allow himself to be himself. It's sad that we don't know much about who he would be outside of the family drama because he devotes all his time and energy to fighting and survival. I want Jin to become a well-rounded person, a person who can talk about small things like their favorite foods and hobbies, someone who's allowed to have friendships and is capable of healthy communication, someone who can show a wide array of emotions and who can find something to live for independent of other people. And, in my humble opinion, Anything less than that would not be a great end to his story. In a world where the plot hinges entirely on a never-ending cycle of hatred, betrayal, and power struggles, the best way to break that cycle isn't just more hatred and murder. Jin is so much more than his parents, his origins, his fighting styles, his sins, and his merits. Or rather, he could be so much more. He just has to delve deep into himself and realize that for himself.
But now I see a storm cloud up in the distance, a terrible omen, a beautiful show. So take me down easy, take me down easy, let me land softly back in your arms.
Well, there we go. That's the end of my sort of video essay. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and... oh dear. Well, I can't just end this topic without talking about that. Now can I?
星空に溶けて消えて、もう色も意味も香りもその手触りも、夜がそっと飲み込む